אתה בני הורים עבדים היינו אתה בני הורים הללו הללו הללויה הללו הללו הללויה הללו הללו הללויה הללו הללו הללויה הללו אל בקודשו הללו בקיאותו הללו בגבורותיו הללו כרוד לו הללו הללו הללויה הללו הללו הללויה הללו הללו הללויה הללו הללו הללויה הללו בתקע שופר הללו בנבל וכינור הללו בתוף ומחול הללו במינים ותרודיו הללו הללו הללויה הללו הללו הללויה הללו הללו הללויה הללו הללו הללויה הללו בצלצלי שמע הללו בצלצלי תרועה הללו בצלצלי שמע הללו בצלצלי תרועה הללו הללו הללויה הללו הללו הללויה הללו הללו הללויה הללו הללו הללויה כל השבת הללויה כל השבת הללויה 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 הללו הללו hallelujah 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 ahadiho yeneveto yeneveto veto bekarov ahadiho yeneveto yeneveto veto bekarov ahadiho yibne veto veto bekarov ahadiho yibne veto veto bekarov bimheirab yameinu bekarov bimheirab yameinu
Shalom Chaverim and welcome to Diveri Geulah. This is a very special program that will take us through this entire week, during the week of Pesach, as we are commanded during this week to discuss the topic of Geulah, or in Hebrew, redemption. If you have not had a chance yet, please pick up my book, The Besorah According to COVID-19. It is available in English, Spanish, and Italian today. The entire book is filled with the topic of Geulah for the last days. Now this year we're going to do something different. Every evening at 7 p.m. you are going to hear from two speakers all over the world, different teachers, different languages, who come to give you word about the Geulah and the coming of the Messiah. If you are blessed by these programs, if you are truly feel that this is worthy of your support, please, especially during the Chag, consider supporting us here at Ahavat Ammi Ministries, and we continue to bring you quality programming every day, and especially now during the time of the Pesach. Before we start every evening, we are going to as we are commanded, we are going to count the Omer. Remember, we are counting 7 complete 49 days, which leads us to the 50th day, which is Shavuot, the giving of the Torah. Every day, a different word, a different attribute is what we're praying for. In the very first day, we pray for Chokhmah. In the second day, we pray for Binah, understanding. May God give us understanding in this second day. Let us say the prayer together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al sfirat haomer. And let us say together, Amen. And now say with me, Ayom Shnei Yom LaOmer. Today is 2 days for the Omer. I hope today you will be blessed. We are going to have with us today both More Matan and Pastor Joseph John to kick out this amazing week that is ahead of ourselves. I hope you will be blessed. Again, we can't wait to have you with us every night, 7 p.m. Central. God bless you. Chag Sameach. And we will see you here every day as we talk about Geulah. Shalom, everybody.
Shalom and Chag Sameach. I'm Pastor Matt McEwen, and I want to wish a blessed Passover season to you and to your family. It is my joy to be teaching at this time with a dear friend and a brother in Messiah, Pastor Joseph John. We'll go to him in a bit. This is such an important thing for us to understand, those of us that come from a church background. Passover is central to our faith and our story. Passover is the story, of course, of the redemption of the Jewish people, the Israelites, from Egypt. But as we celebrate and commemorate the Passover, the festival of freedom, the rabbis tell us that you are to celebrate it as if you yourself were freed from the bonds of slavery, from the Egyptians. Not just that this was something that happened a long time ago to some different people, but that it is happening to you in this moment. And so it is ever present every single year. And as we have seen, Passover is a participatory holiday. It involves everyone. There are, of course, many readings, and even the children get involved. What is it about Passover that people from my background, the Christian background, need to recognize? What are some things that need to be pointed out to us? What are some misunderstandings that need to be corrected? These are things that I hope to address with you in my time. First of all, I want to say that Passover is a commemoration. It is a remembrance. And we must remember that the meal that Yeshua shared with his Talmidim, with his apostles, his disciples, the meal that he shared with them was also a remembrance. What do I mean by that? Well, the meal that Yeshua had with his disciples that the church calls the Last Supper was a remembrance in that it was a Passover-like experience, but it also is not taking place on the actual day of Passover. And because of this, there would not have been any lamb at it. As Rabbi Bernstein is quick to point out to us, this is something that is a commemoration. Rabbi Shapira says that we should look at it like a remembrance. This is a time when he gave some very clear object lessons. There are some scholars, Shulam for instance, that says, according as quoted in the Jewish New Testament commentary by David Stern, he thinks that this may have even been the completion of maybe a reading of a book of the Tanakh, or it may be a celebratory banquet at the completion of a mitzvah. This may be. We're not sure. But we think we are sure that it's not taking place on the actual night of Passover, although there are some Passover elements that take place in it. So why is it that people from a Christian background need to understand this? First of all, Yeshua dies on Passover. And so because he dies on Passover, this meal that precedes the Passover cannot be an actual Passover Seder. But it has that flavor to it. They are eating bread, they are drinking wine, they're dipping into something. There are many elements that take place in a Passover Seder that are going on at this time. Now, Christians have a way of looking at this as something new, that Yeshua was instituting something new, using the background of a Seder to springboard into something brand new. And I think this is a misunderstanding and a miscommunication when those of us that come from the church talk about this Last Supper as something new. And this is where we get the tradition of Holy Communion. We should really make sure to understand that Yeshua is not inventing something on the spot here. When he says, "This is my body and this is my blood," we would disagree with those of our friends from a Catholic background that would believe that this is actually the physical body and blood of the Messiah. This is a metaphor. This is something on a midrashic level. It's a teaching tool. It's not something actual, not something literal that is happening here. As he gathers with his Talmudim in this place, and there is a traditional spot in Jerusalem that we actually filmed for the Kosher Pastor and Uri programs with Rabbi Shapira. We filmed near this location that is known as the Upper Room. This is something that has been a part of Christian tradition for a long time, and you can actually go there and visit it. Now, we're not sure that this is the actual place where this meal happened, but it's a nice place to visit, and tradition is powerful, whether it's Jewish tradition or Christian tradition. And according to Christian tradition, this is the place where this meal took place. He gathered with his disciples, they shared a meal together, they were reclining at table. Very interesting things happened at that meal. Some very famous scriptures are quoted happen at that meal. For instance, "You know the place where I am going, and I'm going there to prepare a place for you," in response to Thomas. "You know the place where I am going." There are many, many things that we see within the Seder that we can glean these object lessons from. Now, as far as the Christian tradition of communion, when Yeshua does this in the context of something that seems very much like a Seder meal, of course, this is what Paul is referring to when he says, "Whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." Now, for me, for someone that grew up in the church, and I'm still a pastor at a Christian church, to me, this calls up memories of childhood of taking Holy Communion. And different churches have different traditions as to how often they do this. Some people take it monthly, some people do it weekly, some people once a quarter. But I think the actual original intent of this was during this Passover time was to remember the broken body and the poured out blood of the Messiah. He is like the broken matzah, as has been mentioned earlier and will be mentioned again in later teachings. He is the object lesson that we are learning about during this, what we call the Last Supper. So when we look at the tradition of Holy Communion, we can see that it comes from here, and we sometimes look at the scriptures that talk about breaking bread as echoes of this Last Supper experience. And so when we look at the Bible with a Christian lens, we can maybe see something that's not there. For instance, in the book of Acts, when it says that they're meeting with each other in each other's homes and they're breaking bread with one another, many of us can get the idea that they were participating in the Christian tradition of Holy Communion. But this is anachronistic. It just doesn't line up timeline-wise. Breaking bread is still a phrase that is used to this day that just means to share a meal with one another. So because of the Christian tradition and the love in the Christian church of the tradition of Holy Communion, we can sometimes see it in places where it's not actually taking place. So to reiterate, the Passover itself is a remembrance. It's a commemoration of the first Passover. And you're supposed to imagine that you yourself were freed from slavery. But this that Christians call the Last Supper is also a remembrance. It's something that's commemorating. It's something that has Passover elements to it, but it did not take place on the actual night of Passover. And because of that, as I've already mentioned, there's not lamb that is served. Now, something that needs to be pointed out, and that is until the temple was destroyed, people ate lamb during the Passover meal because it was the Paschal lamb. It was the Korban Pesach, the Passover offering that was given. Still today in Ashkenazi homes, you will not see lamb on the table because the tradition is, since the temple does not, we will not eat lamb. But in the Sephardic tradition, many homes will even say that it's almost like a requirement that you need to have lamb, as long as you are not acting like it is the Korban Pesach. And depending on where you fall in your particular opinion or tradition, you may have lamb, you may not have lamb. But they did not have lamb, at least the Korban Pesach, at this particular meal because it had not been offered yet. And we need to remember that the bread and the lamb was eaten together. The bread and the lamb was eaten together. So when Yeshua is saying, "This is my body," and referring to the bread, the remembrance that happened at Passover Seders until the temple was destroyed, when they were eating lamb, they would even make a deeper connection. It's not just that this bread represents the body because it is broken, but the lamb that is eaten with it represents Yeshua as well, because on a midrashic level, he is the Passover offering, if you will. He is the Passover lamb. As Paul says in the New Testament, since Yeshua, our Passover, has been sacrificed, let's get rid of the old yeast in our lives. So when he says, "This is my body," again, this is an object lesson. This is a metaphor. This is not something that is taken literally. There's something else that I'd like to bring up before we go to Pastor Joseph John about this particular meal, and that is that foot washing takes place. Now, this is obviously something that's very humbling, not only to do, but to have done to you. People's feet, it's a sensitive issue, and to have someone wash your feet, it's something that traditionally a servant would do. But to me, it calls to mind a story that happens even earlier in the Bible. Before I go there, I want to tell you about the church that I grew up in Indiana, in the Midwest of the United States, before I moved back to Florida with my family. My father was the pastor of a church in a denomination that one of their special things that they did, they called them ordinances, one of the things that they did as a denomination was foot washing. They, of course, participated in the Christian tradition of baptism and in the Christian tradition of communion, but also they had a third tradition of foot washing. And so a few times a year, there would be a special service where we would literally wash each other's feet. Now, many people in the Christian world have participated in services like this, and it has been a very humbling experience. It's been a blessing for people. If you've never participated in it, it definitely is an interesting experience. Now, Yeshua washes his disciples' feet, and that in and of itself we could talk about. We could talk about the servanthood aspect of it. We could talk about how he, as kind of their leader, this was odd that he is doing this act. But I want to go back even further in the Bible and make a bit of a connection here. Because the moment that he washes their feet is immediately after they are arguing about who is the greatest, who is the best. This is something that more than once his disciples got into arguments about who is greater than someone else, who is the best, who is the most prominent. It's interesting that it's at this moment that Yeshua begins to wrap a towel around his waist and wash the feet of his disciples. All the way back in the Torah, in the book of Genesis, Abraham is visited by these divine visitors, by three angelic visitors. Now, he doesn't know who they are at first. And the famous commentator Rashi brings up something very interesting about in, I believe it's chapter 18, verse 4, where Abraham offers to wash the feet of these visitors. He says, "Let a little water be brought and let's wash your feet." Now, this, of course, is a humbling thing, and yes, we could talk about it being an act of servanthood, but Rashi talks about it in a little bit of a different way. It has a different connotation for Rashi. You see, there were cultures around Abraham at that point, if you can imagine this, that actually worshipped dust. They actually worshipped the dust of the ground, the dirt, and they would not apparently wash their feet because having this dust on their feet was looked at as some sort of act of worship. So Rashi says that Abraham washing the feet of these guests is actually a way that he is saying, let us wash off this paganism. Let's wash off this idolatry. I can't allow you to be a guest in my home if you are participating in this. And so let us wash this off. That is something that is amazing to me, because does that bear any connection? Does it have any significance at what Christians would call the Last Supper? Well, I'm not sure, but perhaps there is a connection that can be made that what you are doing right now as you are arguing is you are acting like godless pagans, and I'm going to wash this off of you. It's an interesting thought. It's an interesting question. Is there a connection here between Abraham and what Yeshua is doing? We do know this. Peter is resistant to it. Peter says, "You shall not wash my feet." But then Yeshua makes this interesting statement. Peter, if I don't wash your feet, then you will have no part with me. That is a shocking statement, a stunning statement. You will have no part with me unless you allow me to wash your feet. Peter, of course, then changes his tone and says, "Lord, then not only my feet, but wash my hands and my head as well." Yeshua then says, "He who has had a bath needs only to wash his feet, and he is completely clean." What Yeshua is saying here is unless we allow him to wash us, so to speak, then we cannot have a part with him. It's not just an act of servanthood. It was a symbol of the washing that needs to take place. What is it that is in our lives that we need to have Yeshua wash us of, to clean us of? What do we need washing for in our lives? I will tell you, in this world, in the modern era, it has been discouraging to me in the last few years, the way that I have seen a rise in not only anti-Semitism, but just in a general sense, a hatred between different groups of people, different races of people, different classes of people, people from different nations, people of different nationalities or colors. It has been discouraging to me to see this hatred on the rise. And the reason it's been discouraging is the rabbis tell us that this is the reason that the Holy Temple in Jerusalem was destroyed. It wasn't for a lack of Torah knowledge. It wasn't for anything else, but for the sin of what's called sinat chinam, of baseless hatred. This is what Pastor Joseph John, my partner in this teaching, is going to be talking about, this baseless hatred. I would ask you, we have gone through the searching in our homes for the leaven, for the chametz. We have gone through the searching of our hearts, as Paul says, that if you are going to do this remembrance of the bread and the cup, what Christians call Holy Communion, if you're going to do this remembrance as a part of your Passover, then you need to take a self-examination. We need to get rid of the old yeast, get rid of the chametz in our lives. But I would say to you, examine your hearts and see specifically, is there any of this seed of baseless hatred in your heart? Is there any of this, even just a hint of baseless hatred, whether it's anti-Semitism or some sort of racism or anything like this, where you think you are somehow better or superior to anyone else? Is that going on within your heart? Because that, ladies and gentlemen, needs to be totally washed away. It needs to be washed away by Yeshua. We need to say to our Messiah, not only my feet, but wash my hands and my head as well. This is the type of spiritual cleansing that we need, especially in this world. As we prepare for the coming kingdom, we need to be in a constant state of awareness of where we are spiritually. Where is our relationship with the Lord? Are you allowing Him to wash your feet? Shalom and Chag Sameach.
Past few days, there have been reports of new variants of the COVID-19 virus in South Africa and the United Kingdom.
Extra COVID restrictions come into force today, as ministers said a new variant of coronavirus is out of control.
The events in Washington have taken a violent and tumultuous turn in the past few hours.
Shalom and welcome to Kehillat Bethlehem and Shuvu, India. To everyone who is celebrating this very special Chag of Pesach during the Chag of Matzot, I just want to bless you, I want to welcome you, and I want to say Chag Pesach Samayach. We are in the holy days of the Chag of Matzot. We are on special days. Those of you who have taken time to be part of a Seder, you would have observed a very beautiful connection of the Seder with the Mashiach. We here in India had a beautiful time of celebration, of vigilant watching, vigilant expectation, and more than anything else, a sense of rejoicing in our hearts this season. We just want to thank Hashem for bringing us to the season so that we can celebrate, so that we can thank Him. And more than anything else, we have taken time to remember the Messiah Himself during the season. This evening, during the festival of Matzah, I just want to take a couple of few minutes to talk about the Seder and how in the Seder we can see every element that is connected to the Mashiach. I want to remember the Messiah this evening. If you have been part of a Pesach Seder, you would have observed that every Pesach Seder, there are a lot of questions that are raised. And if that was not enough, there were more questions asked again and again. There was the Manishtana, where children would ask the 4 questions. They would either say it or chant it, depending on your community. The questions we need to ask ourselves this evening is, why are some of the rituals done the way they are done before we get into the Haggadah, the story of the Seder? If you remember, at the very beginning of the Seder, there was a performance of the urkats, which was the hand washing, which was done without a blessing. Then there was karpas, where we took a piece of celery or parsley or any other vegetable, and we would dip it in the salt water twice, and we had to make sure that our fingers also would be immersed fully into the water. And then we had the yakats, where we would break the matzah, the middle matzah, we would break it into 2. Also the dipping of the karpas, while we dip it today in salt water, originally it was done in vinegar. It was done in vinegar. And then we have the yakats, which was the breaking of the middle matzah. So the question is, what makes the performance of all these rituals so strange? Is that when this performance is done, there is no explanation to them. Usually in a Haggadah, depending on which Haggadah you follow, either Ashkenazi, Sephardic, Mizrahi, etc., there may be a comment on why we do certain things. We, as a community, we were using this Haggadah, Nisan to Nisan Pesach Haggadah from Ahavat Ammi Ministries. If you have not got your copy, you should go to pesach.shuvu.tv and download a copy which is free and available. The beauty of this Haggadah is that it not only leads us through the whole ceremony, but it has a very messianic commentary to each and every part of it, which helps us to connect each and everything to the messianic consciousness. Traditionally, most people say the karpas is done because we remember the salt water or the Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds, crossing, so it recalls that. The middle matzah, the yakats, that's the afikomen that we get to eat later. Some may even put it on their shoulders. The hand washing without a blessing. There is no explanation in detail on why we do these things. And immediately after these three things are over, the Haggadah picks up on the Magid, or the preacher, who yells out with the broken part of the yakats, the middle matzah, and he says, Ha lakma anaya. This is the bread of affliction, or the bread of poverty that our forefathers ate in Egypt. Whoever is hungry, let him come and eat. Whoever is needy, let him come and celebrate Pesach. Now we are here. Next year, may we be in the land of Israel. And we conclude by saying, now we are slaves. Next year, may we be free men. So it is from there we proceed to ask questions surrounding the mystery of the broken matzah that is connected to the ambiguous rituals of the Seder, the urkats, the hand washing, the karpas, and also the breaking of the matzah. So if your mind is still fresh from last night, if it is fresh, for those who are not part of the Seder, you should get a copy of the Pesach Haggadah from Nisan to Nisan Haggadah, or ask someone. You need to be part of a Seder. It's such a powerful thing. This is something our master and rabbi was part of. And before he died on that very particular year, he said that as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, do this in remembrance of me. So for us as believers in Messiah, the Pesach table, the Lord's table, the Pesach Seder is such a very important event that we can partake of. It is something we experience, where we can experience the coming out of Egypt. And not only that, we can remember the great redemption that happened for us and the future redemption that is about to take place. So with all these questions, which we were talking about in the beginning, the question that needs to be asked this evening is, what is Pesach all about? What is the root of Pesach? Everything has a root, right? Especially when it comes to any festival. When it comes to Rosh Hashanah, when it comes to Yom Kippur, when it comes to Sukkot. What is the underlying meaning of that celebration, or that Chag, or that feast? In the same way, what is Pesach all about? According to a consensus taken of any Jewish person in the world that basically knows anything about Pesach, they will say, well, Pesach is about Geulah, redemption. It's about remembering the bondage from Egypt. Itziat Mitzrayim, the coming out of Egypt. So it's all about being saved from bondage. It's all about redemption. Those are the two main highlights that happens. So my question is, if that's the purpose, if Pesach is all about redemption, the question I would like to ask is, why is Israel still in exile today? If it's all about redemption, if it's all about Geulah, then why is Israel in exile today? Why is Israel still in exile? Every Pesach, millions of Jewish families gather around the Seder table to revisit the ancient story of redemption. Many believers of the body of Messiah also do remember the ancient story of redemption. It's the redemption from Egypt. After expounding the Haggadah, or maybe sleeping through the Haggadah, whatever the case might be, everyone jumps at the end and they either start to say or saying, Lashana Habaha Yerushalayim. Everyone starts saying, next year in Yerushalayim. Either you are happy because the Seder has ended, or you're really excited and you're looking forward to be in Yerushalayim. But nonetheless, the chant builds up some type of anticipation, of hoping that one day God will restore the Jewish people to their former glory. The question I would like to ask each of us this evening is, why the delay? Why the delay then? What is going on here with this delay? We all are happy when we sing a couple of songs, we maybe do a couple of dances depending on your communities, but why the delay? For the past 2,000 years, the Jewish people have been in exile. And Chazal tells us that the reason for the 2,000-year plus exile is because of sinat kinam, hate without a cause, baseless hatred. That is what brought the destruction of the temple, the second temple, and that's what scattered the Jewish people to the ends of the earth. It's sinat kinam, hate without a cause. And regardless of any preconceived notions that any rabbi even tries to teach, the current exile of the Jewish people they are in does not have an expiration date. It does not have any date when it will expire. If you go back to the Torah, especially in Pasha Behar, Bekukotai, and even if you go back to the book of Jeremiah, when the Jewish people were kicked out of the first exile with the first temple, it was decreed that they would have a 70-year exile in relation to the violation of the Shemitah laws. You can read that in Jeremiah chapter 29. For 70 years it was decreed. The Jews come back, but then they go to another exile. In this exile, there is no expiration date for that exile. And the Jews have been in exile ever since. So the preconceived notion is that if we do this mitzvah correct, or if we do that mitzvah correct, or if we put our focus over here, or if we do this, it will somehow expedite or speed up the redemption process. But friends, that's not what the Torah says. The Torah does not say if we do this way or practice it this mitzvah this way, if you light the candle in a certain angle or hang your mezuzah with screws instead of the tree and tape, it is going to speed up the coming of Mashiach. It doesn't say that. In his Shemirat HaLashon, guarding the tongue, by the Chofetz Chaim, he explains that just as sinat kinam, hate without a cause, is what brought the destruction of the second temple, he says that it is sinat kinam, it is the baseless hatred that prevents the temple from being rebuilt and keeps Israel in exile. In other words, what the Chofetz Chaim is saying is that the reason why God has not restored the Jewish people from exile and rebuild what we look for, the third temple, is because of baseless hatred. Which means when the question is asked today, who destroyed the temple? Who is responsible for the temple's destruction and the exile of the Jewish people? Every Jew has to look into the mirror and say, I destroyed the Beit HaMikdash temple. I destroyed the temple. I did it. That might sound strange, because how can the Jewish people who live in the 21st century part of the world and say that he or she destroyed the temple that was once in existence 2,000 plus years ago? They were not there. They weren't born in this century and time. How can they say that they destroyed the temple? Sinat kinam, hate without a cause, is what keeps the temple from being rebuilt. Therefore, if a Jew's action and lifestyle is not geared towards living a life of redemption, living a life of holiness, which is way of redemption and rebuilding the temple, then their actions and lifestyles are actually what basically keeps the Jewish people in exile and the temple to be destroyed. Because if you lived a life that was worthy of redemption, redemption would happen. But if you do not live a life that is worthy of redemption, redemption would not happen. So it is with this that every Jew must look in the mirror and acknowledge that because of sinat kinam, hate without a cause, the temple lies waste. The Jewish people stagger in exile. And so the Chofetz Chaim explained that as long as there is hate without a cause that resides in the heart of the Jewish people, there will be no expiration date for the current exile. That's pretty scary. because there is no promise of a glorious ending. In other words, time has come after the destruction of the temple when the Romans destroyed it. The time where the Romans were the agents of God. Just like God used the Babylonians during the first temple, after the temple was destroyed, the Jews were scattered. Then there were the pogroms, then there came the Inquisitions, then there came the Holocaust. Then you have anti-Semitism. And if anyone remembers anything, anti-Semitism comes into the world because the Jewish people block the Shekinah through their sins. As I pointed out this before, when you go around nations, for the nations we see, the nations have tornadoes, or they get earthquakes, or hurricanes, or droughts. You don't get that in Israel. You know what we get in Israel? Gentiles. Gentiles are natural disasters in Israel, terrorists. That's what's called anti-Semitism. Why? Because when you block the channel, you cause a blockage in the divine channel of God's presence from coming down into the world. The Jews are supposed to be like the sprinkler heads that actually radiates God's presence out to the nations. But if there is no flow coming through the pipeline, it is all blocked up. And you have this problem. Chaos starts to evolve. So Chofetz Chaim says that as long as hate without a cause resides inside the heart of the Jewish people, there is no expiration date for the exile. And that means possibly another Holocaust can happen, or another pogrom can happen, or another Inquisition. That is something Jewish people do not want to hear about, or the nations also don't want to hear about. But somehow we feel that we are safe. We are living in this 21st century lifestyle in this part of the world. Friends, I just want you to know, just look at the world around you. And if you still think that you are safe after all these years, I mean, this is what they said in Germany too. This is what they're telling in all the nations right now. You're safe. So while Sinat Kinam, the Hebrew word Sinat Kinam basically means baseless hatred. This is what it literally translates as hate without a cause. According to the rabbinical understanding, or the rabbi's understanding, the underlying cause of Sinat Kinam is actually directed against the leaders of Israel. Let us look into some of the few scriptural reference. A couple from the Brit Kadashah, from the New Covenant or the Apostolic writings. John 15:25. John 15:25, Yeshua says, this is to fulfill the words of the Tanakh, that they hated me with the baseless hate. Sinat Kinam. Yeshua is basically alluding to the book of Psalms, where David himself in two places. Number one, in Psalms 69 verse 5 and verse 4 in the English. Psalm 69 verse 5 verse 4 in the English, he says, more abundant than the hairs of my head are those who hate me. Sinat Kinai, hate without a cause. And then 35:19, Psalms 35:19. In Psalms 35:19, David HaMelech says, see, my enemies have become many, and they hate me with violent animosity. Sinat Kinai, hate without a cause. I want you to understand what David HaMelech is saying. David is not talking about Gentiles in this passage. He's talking about fellow Jews who hated him without a cause. His own son dethroned him. Shaul HaMelech tried to kill him. David was a wanted man by his own Jewish family. The leader, the king of Israel, had baseless hate displayed against him. When Yeshua said the words, they hated me without a cause, he's talking about the Jewish leaders and other Jewish people who despised him as a leader. So this teaches us that the root of Sinat Kinam, hate without a cause, is hate against the leaders of Israel. According to Chazal, this is what caused the destruction of the temple. And the Chofetz Chaim explains that hate without a cause, Sinat Kinam, is what keeps the Jews in exile. So with this in mind, why during the Seder when recalling the redemption from Mitzrayim, from Egypt, we are not prompting our hearts to search for redemption from the current exile, which is the cause of Sinat Kinam. In other words, how can everyone say or sing Lashana Habaha Yerushalayim next year in Jerusalem, but fail to remove any Sinat Kinam, fail to remove baseless hatred in our own hearts? It's chutzpah, it's guts. We say next year we're going to be in Jerusalem, but yet I have a residual comments within me. I have leaven within me. What, are you crazy? You cannot go before the king when you have filth and dirt within you. It doesn't work that way. Some people say, but I don't have anything. I've searched out the leaven. You know, the amazing part about Pesach is that many people go crazy and wild about cleaning up the physical comments from their homes. There's nothing wrong with that. You should do that. But friends, the focus of Pesach is not about just cleaning the physical comments. It's about the spiritual comments that lives within us. The offenses that we keep towards one another. Offenses that we keep towards leadership at times. The bitterness that we keep towards one another. The bitterness that we have towards our own self. The jealousies, the envies, the comparisons, the rejection, the abandonment, and the types of things we get involved with, occult. The scripture says rebellion is like witchcraft. If you have been rebelling against the ways of God, if you have been rebelling against your local community or the local leadership, it's occult. And many people, especially after the virus has come out, many people are living in fear. Many people look at the government as their Mashiach. Many people look maybe as maybe a vaccine as the Mashiach. People are keeping their hope, their faith on everything else. Everybody is scared. I'm scared to meet one another. I'm scared to talk to one another. I don't want anybody to come into my life. I'm living a life of fear. I'm living a life of assumptions. I'm living a life of idolatry. I'm living a life of fornication. I'm living a life of adultery. I'm living a life of doubt. I'm living a life of fear. I mean, in my thoughts, in my feelings, in my words, in my actions. Many are very careful of what goes into their mouth. But how many of us are very careful what comes out of our mouth? Friends, you can't go before the king when you have so much of comments, so much of filth, so much of dirt within you. It doesn't work that way. Yes, we come together. We celebrate the redemption of Pesach. But is that actually why we do Pesach? No. That is just some of the highlights of what happens during a Pesach Seder. But that's not the underlying cause of why we do Pesach. Pesach, Passover, is supposed to prompt us to do some searching about what is the real message of redemption. As I pointed out in the Haggadah, we read, now we are slaves, next year may we be free men. Let me ask you a question. Who wants to be free? Anyone? Everyone wants to be free. Everyone wants to be Bene Kurim, free men. So why in the Haggadah do we say, now we are slaves, next year we maybe be free men? The Haggadah is acknowledging that until the inner comments, until the inner leaven. What is the inner comments? The inner comments is bitterness. The inner comments is pride. The inner comments is ego. Until that inner comments, which is related to the Etz Hadas, is extracted from our souls, We are not truly free men at all. We are still slaves. Many of us in the Messianic community, many of times in a Messianic community, we sing songs like Ahavat Ammi Ministries. I believe in the coming of Mashiach. I believe in Messiah. I want Messiah to come. Messiah, Messiah, Messiah. But the question is, friends, do we really want Messiah now? Then what are we doing to bring Mashiach? We say that we want Messiah to come, but many of times we have hidden secret sins. We have commands, we have bitterness, we have ego, we have pride, we have jealousy, we have envy, and we have a great problem with fear. We have unbelief, we have doubt, we don't want to acknowledge it. We just think it's between me and God. Friends, what are you doing to bring Mashiach? What did you do yesterday? The day before? What are you going to do tomorrow and the day after tomorrow that might bring the Mashiach? Let me ask the Gufa Mashiach. What are we doing? We sing about it, but we don't do anything about it. We claim to be quote unquote believers. We say that we are believers in Messiah because of his death and resurrection. We say that we have been free. But friends, if you have bitterness to one another, if you're not able to look at your fellow brother, no matter what he or she believes or does, if you're not able to look at that person with a clean heart and a clean eye, you're not free at all. Many of times we have this habit in the body of Messiah. Someone who does not agree with me, let me not talk to them. Let me just ignore them. Let me not communicate with them. Let me not get into any kind of argument. Let me just tell my people to be away. I don't want to discuss because it's against my philosophy of life. I don't have a heart to search out the scriptures. I don't want to believe everything anybody says. I just want to do whatever I want to do. 2 Peter chapter 3 verses 11 and 12, if you've taken time to read, it says that since all of these things are to be destroyed in this way, Peter is telling what kind of people should you be. Peter is saying, live your lives in holiness. Live your lives in godliness. How are we going to live our lives in holiness? Holiness basically means being set apart. How am I going to be set apart? Set apart is not according to the way I think, according to the way I believe, according to the way I do, according to my actions and words. I'm not set apart because I feel this is what set apart means. Set apart is all there according to the scriptures. I have a set apart God, so I need to live according to his standards. To know what his standards are, I need to know what the scriptures are saying. That's why we need to get back to the Torah and understand what the scriptures are saying and talking about. Peter says that if you want to hasten the coming of the Lord, you need to live lives of holiness and godliness in these last days. So it's the same guiltiness of the regular Jewish community that celebrates Pesach and sings next year in Jerusalem. It's the same guiltiness the body of Mashiach also have. We have the pride, we have the chutzpah, we have the guts to say that we have the Mashiach, but our lives are not aligned with the Messiah himself. We have nothing to do with Messiah. How do I know it? Our actions prove it. Our words prove it. What we do in secret proves it. What we do to one another proves it. Our lifestyles prove it. We are guilty. We are guilty. We have murdered our own brother. We have murdered our own sister. We have murdered our own community. But yet we call ourselves, we have the guts to call ourselves, we are the people of God. We are the body of Messiah without even understanding the inner command still remains. I believe the main reason why people's hearts are not searching for an answer about how to be redeemed from the current exile is because they have overlooked the lost secret of the Seder. Everyone puts an emphasis on Itziat Mitzrayim, coming out of Egypt, the bondages and hardships of Egypt, but nobody actually focuses on how Israel ended up in Egypt. That's why I must ask this evening, what is the root of Pesach? Everything must have roots. What is the root of Pesach? In other words, is the highlight of the Seder all about the bondage of Egypt. You know, my uncle, one time, he worked hard in Goshen as a farmer. And he worked like 14 hours a day. Okay. What does that have to do with the Seder? Is it about the miraculous deliverances? Or you know, the Torah says God showed up. He was a fire, pillar of fire by night and cloud by day. The sea split open. Wow. There were miracles, great miracles. It's like Deepavali in this part of the world, or 4th of July in the Western world. Everybody looks at this beauty of crackers and lightings, and you say, ooh, all that kind of stuff. That's not what the Seder is all about, my friends. But that's the primary focus of the Pesach season. So we have to ask the question, what is the root of Pesach? Now, I just mentioned here in the beginning that at the beginning of the Seder, we begin it with the mysterious performance of urkats washing hands without a blessing, of karpas dipping a vegetable, what's supposed to be salt water, when it was once vinegar, twice. The yakats, we break the middle matzah and later becomes the afikomen for the dessert. And the question is, why are hands washed without a blessing? We do it later during the Seder, but at the later part of the Seder, we recite the blessing of the Netilat Yadayim. But in the beginning, there is nothing. We just wash our hands, we dip some parsley, we break some bread, and we continue the saying that this is the bread of affliction. What's going on here? If you go to some observant Jewish communities and ask, what's karpas? What is this karpas business? Like when we were talking about karpas in our community, someone said, you know, it's like kar and pas. It's like karpas. He's trying to help us understand how to pronounce karpas. He said kar and pas. So some people, so if you go and ask observant Jewish communities about what a karpas is, some of them would say, you know, when I was a kid, karpas was an acronym for carrot, radishes, parsley, celery. That's what it means. But that's not correct. It's very cute for kids. But people who teach kids that is because they were never taught what the actual meaning was. So the question is, what is karpas? The word karpas is derived from two words. Of course, you know what? It's there in the Messianic commentary. So if you have not got a copy of this Haggadah, Nisan to this, is one of its kind. It's not, it is a traditional commentary. It is a traditional Haggadah, but it has a Messianic commentary to it. So it's worth your time. Get a copy of it. So the word karpas is derived from two words. The word karpas is first derived from ketonot pasib. Anyone knows what ketonot pasib is? Not a possum that goes out in your yard. Not those kind of animals. Like the one in the movie Ice Age, if you watched. Ketonot pasib, anyone heard of it? You should have. It's there in the Bible. It says in the Torah, in Genesis chapter 37 verse 3. Genesis chapter 37 verse 3, it says, Vayasa lo ketonet pasib. He, Yaakov, made Yosef a ketonet pasib, a tunic. The word karpas is a reference to the coat of Joseph. We dip the karpas in remembrance of Joseph's brothers who dipped his ketonet pasib, his tunic, in blood. As I mentioned, karpas is made of two words. Pas, which means stripe, is derived from Joseph's coat. pasim, stripes. Pasim is related to the coat of many colors which was given to Joseph by his father. The word car, what does it mean? Did they ride a car down to Egypt? The word car, kaf resh, comes from meker, literally meaning sail. It means sail, a sail. Joseph was sold. So we dip the karpas as a reminder of the sail of Yosef, Mekeret Yosef, when his ketunet pasim and his tunic was dipped in blood. The root of Pesach, the root of going down to Mitzrayim, the root of going down to Egypt is not because of the miraculous deliverance and all the supernatural miracles that were performed. It's not about bondage. The whole root of Pesach, the going down of Mitzrayim, going down to Mitzrayim to Egypt is because of the selling of Joseph, Mekeret Yosef. Why did Joseph's brothers sell him? Listen to what the Torah says in Genesis chapter 37 verse 4. Genesis chapter 37 verse 4. It says over there, Vayiru Ekav. His brothers saw that it was him whom their father loved the most, so all of his brothers hated him. Sinat Kinam, hate without a cause. All his brothers hated him. And so the underlying cause of the Pesach is Sinat Kinam, hate without a cause. And Chazal explains this was the climax of the destruction of the second temple. And as the Chofetz Chaim, as I mentioned here before, says, it is Sinat Kinam, hate without a cause, is what keeps the Jewish people. I would say it's not the Jewish people, even it is even the body of Messiah in exile with no expiration date. So you can say that I am part of the body of Messiah, but you are still in exile because you have hate without a cause in your heart. You're not able to look beyond your theology, your doctrine, your belief systems, and understand and help your brother or sister in the body of Messiah. So in other words, Sinat Kinai, hate without a cause, just did not just start 2,000 years ago. It started 3,700 years ago, close to 4,000 with Yosef. What's also unique is that in many Orthodox communities, there is a custom that right after you do the yakats, you break the middle matzah, which becomes the afikomen. You wrap it in a napkin, and what some people do is that they toss it on their shoulders. They put it on their shoulders and they walk around and they do a little show, and they say, this is how our fathers went down to Egypt. Real cute. We went down to Egypt schlepping something that resembles the afikomen. This custom is based on a Talmudic practice that when the temple stood during the Kurban Pesach, the offering of the Passover lamb in the temple, the people would toss the Kurban Pesach on their shoulder and they would say, Tios, Tios, we are carrying our Kurban Pesach like Arab merchants. Now, as strange as this custom is, what in the world do Arab merchants have to do with Pesach, let alone Kurban Pesach? What is this strange custom that is done in temple times and that it even translates today in some sayers by putting on afikomen on the shoulder and say, just like temple times, just like when we went to Egypt. Where does this custom come from? Like everything based in Judaism is, if it doesn't come from the Torah, then you can't trust it. So the question is, where in the Torah are Arab merchants described as schlepping relating to Pesach, which represents the descent of going down to Mitzrayim? Genesis 37:27. Genesis 37:27. It says, Yehuda speaks up. Let us sell him, the Mekir. Yosef, sell him to the Ishmaelites, the Arabs. He's our brother of our own flesh. So here, the afikomen on the shoulder is all related to the sale of Joseph. The karpas is all about the sale of Joseph. The Joseph is a type of the Mashiach. Chazal, the sages explain that the sin of the selling of Joseph was much more detrimental than the sin of the golden calf. In other words, the reason why Israel experienced this exile in the very first place is because of hate without a cause, that they sold Joseph to the Gentiles. In most writings, they all agree on the same thing. Israel's exile, even the violation of the Torah, the destruction of the first temple, everything was based upon the violation of selling Joseph. Proof of that can be found in the Torah itself, when the Torah records in Pasha Miketz, Genesis 41 through 44, the interaction between Joseph and his brothers. The Torah doesn't call Joseph's brothers Akav, Joseph's brothers. They don't even call him they don't even call him Bnei Yaakov, the sons of Jacob. Rather, it refers to Joseph's brothers as Ha-Anusim, the men. Now Israel in the Torah, in the Tanakh, in rabbinical writings are called Ha-Adam, which refers to Adam. They were referred to like a complete man. The nations, the Gentiles, are always called either Anosh, which basically means frail, mortal, or they are called Gever, but they are never called Adam. Only Israel is called by the name Adam. But here in the Torah, when Joseph interacts with his brothers, the Torah does not call Joseph's brothers as Akav Yosef. It doesn't call them as Bnei Yaakov, the brothers of Joseph or the sons of Jacob. It says Ha-Anusim, the men. It's there in Genesis 43. What does it mean? What it means is that basically, because Joseph's brothers cut him off, in the eyes of God, because of Sinat Kinam, in the eyes of God, because of hate without a cause, in the eyes of God, because Joseph's brothers cut him off, they were not related. In other words, when we have hate without a cause, one to another with our brothers and sisters in Mashiach, in the eyes of God, there is no relationship with me and him. So God allows the Jewish people to remain in exile because of this hate without a cause. By calling Joseph's brothers as Ha-Anusi, the men, indicates that Joseph's brothers did not consider Joseph as their brother. That is why they sold him. That is what same thing that has happened to many of us in the body of Messiah. We have sold one another to one another. We have betrayed one another. We have been so rude. We have been so cruel. We have just behaved like our brothers, or our Jewish brothers. We are no different from them. Just like they are in exile, we may have the Mashiach, but we are also in exile. How many of times we have sold one another, my friends? It is no coincidence that 2,000 years ago, at the climax, at the apex of Jewish prophecy during the Second Temple, that the sages explained that the destruction of the temple and the exile of the Jewish people is because of hate without a cause, Sinat Kinam. It basically maximized itself 2,000 years ago, and this hate without a cause, which started with Joseph himself in the book of Genesis. Many years ago, in a Parsha class, there was a rabbi expounding from the Torah portion, Parsha Vayeshev, which is basically Genesis 37 to 40, the same Torah portion where Joseph was sold. He was speaking, and as he was, all of a sudden he asked a rhetorical question to everyone. He asked, why after the destruction of the second temple, why after thousands of years of exile are the Jews blamed as Christ? Why are the Jewish people labeled as Christ killers? Why does the Jewish people experience blood libels? And the rabbi said, Mida keneged Mida. We committed blood libel against Joseph when we sold him to the Gentiles. So measure for measure, we are also treated blood libel. I like the way King Solomon says in Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verse 9. Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verse 9, he says, Ve'ein kol kadash takat hashamesh. Nothing is new under the sun. Friends, when we commit the same kind of behavior like our Jewish brothers have done according to the scriptures, we are committing the same crime as they have done. The same kind of exile they go through, we go through. It's just that we have the name that we are believers in the Messiah, but we are still in exile. The yakats that is broken at the beginning of the Seder is a reference to the betrayal of Joseph, who is broken because of hate without a cause, because of sinat kinah. In the Haggadah, it's sinat kinah. That's what it was. The yakas is broken. That is the yakas that is broken at the beginning of the Seder is a reference to the betrayal of Joseph. We call the matzah, the lechem onim, the bread of poverty, the bread of affliction. In the Haggadah, which is most preserved mostly in Aramaic, the word lakma, lakma ania. Lakma is Aramaic for bread. And there lakma has an aleph at the end, and the aleph basically represents God himself. It represents the divine quality of wisdom. So what the Haggadah teaches is that by partaking of the yakats, that is this broken middle matzah, we are somehow being able to be filled with wisdom, which represents the Shekinah, the feminine aspect of God, the Ruach HaKodesh. You know, there is this reference and allusion to this in Job chapter 33, verse 33. Job 33, verse 33. It says over there, Im ayin ata shamali hakaresh va'alefka chokma. Pay heed to me, hold your peace, and I will teach you wisdom. The word aleph there means to teach. It represents aleph. It represents divine wisdom. What does teaching and learning wisdom have to do with suffering, affliction, and poverty? By quoting Job. Job is an individual who was afflicted by God. When a person is afflicted, their afflictions, they are able to identify with others who suffer. When a person is afflicted, they are able to teach you things to help you endure hardships. Listen to what it says in the Brit Chadashah, Hebrews chapter 2, verse 18. Hebrews 2:18, it says, because Mashiach himself has endured being tested in the sufferings of his soul, he is able to come to the aid of those who are being tested. And later on in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15, it says that we don't have a Kohen Gadol who is unable to sympathize with our weakness, but one who has been tempted in every way, but is without sin. One who has known affliction, truly appreciates the value of deeds of benevolence. So by eating of Mashiach's affliction, we are invested with God's presence. How is Mashiach associated with matzah when Mashiach was never there in Mitzrayim? Because Mashiach is what we call Mashiach ben Yosef, the suffering Messiah that resembles Joseph. And it is through Mashiach's affliction we are invested with God's presence. So at the Seder table, when we raise up the lechem onim, the bread, and we say, this is the bread of affliction, all who are needy, come and eat. Let us put that in perspective in the way Yeshua tells us in John, the Gospel of John, chapter 6, verse 35. What did Yeshua say? John 6:35, Yeshua said to them, I am the bread of life. Anyone who comes to me will not be hungry. Anyone who believes in me will never be thirsty. This is why the Haggadah urges all who are hungry to eat of the broken matzah. All who are hungry, let him come and eat, it says. Let him come and eat. This is called the bread of poverty. Yeshua later on says in the Gospel of Matthew, in the Besorah of Matthew chapter 11, verse 29. Matthew 11:29. Messiah says, accept upon yourself my yoke and learn from me. Learn from me, for I am humble and poor in spirit, and you will find a resting place for your souls. The word in Hebrew, ani, poor in Hebrew, is one of the names for the Messiah in rabbinical material. The word poor, ani in Hebrew, is one of the names of Messiah in rabbinical material. It is based out of the passage where we see in Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9, where Zechariah himself records. Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9, he says, rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion, O daughter of Jerusalem, behold, your king comes to you, righteous, having salvation. And then it goes on to say, who ani, and who is poor, riding on a kamor, a donkey, even on a colt, the foal of a donkey. The Midrash comes along upon this passage in Zechariah and asks the question, why is the Messiah called poor? Why is he being called poor? The Midrash says, because he suffered all those years in prison while the sinners of Israel were mocking him. Based on what the Midrash is saying, the poor one is understood to suffer on account of those who rebelled against God. The reference to prison is the reference to Joseph, who is despised and mocked by his brothers and was thrown into a prison in Mitzrayim, not because of anything he did, but because of God's divine providence. So since Joseph is viewed as a messianic figure, his faith points to the faith of Mashiach. In Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 13 and 14, Solomon is the one who writes this book. Solomon writes a lot of times allegorically. He just did it for the book of Song of Songs. Same thing with Kohelet or Ecclesiastes. It's a lot of allegory. There in Ecclesiastes 4:13, Solomon says, a poor and a wise youth who comes out of prison to be king. This is a reference to Joseph, who was a youth, who was sold to prison and came out as a wise king. The sages come along and say, understand that referred to Joseph, but the remes, the clue, it refers to Mashiach, who is going to be someone who is going to appear to be deprived of his dignity. Why? Because he is going to be considered as a prisoner in Judaism. Let me ask you, what do you think the Jewish people view Yeshua as? They view him as a criminal who is sitting in Gehenna, hell at this point, suffering. That's how lots of Jews view the Mashiach. Some people would say, I was taught that he is at the right hand of the Father. You got to understand the paradox of understanding Mashiach. In the Jewish world, he must be viewed as a fugitive, as a criminal, because if he does not become like that, then he could not do mission. So when people toss the afikoman on their shoulder in relation to the Arab merchants who tossed Joseph on their shoulder, it teaches us that while Joseph may have gone down to Egypt in chains as a prisoner, mocked by his brothers, he came out as a king to bring salvation to the Jews and to the entire world at that time. So too, Mashiach was broken. He was sold to the Gentiles, went down to the grave, which represents prison, and he was deemed as some type of failed Mashiach. But the scriptures say he rose 3 days later with the keys of death to bring salvation to the Jews and to the entire world. The reason why we don't say a blessing during the urkats, the hand washing, is because what we are saying indirectly is that we are getting ready to do a crime and our hands are innocent of it. How do we bless Hashem for something like that? The brakot or the blessings are only done to bless God for good things. Joseph was sold. Mashiach was sold. The hands are washed. Nothing is said. There is no blessing for that because we are doing something that is not good. We are selling righteous individuals. Immediately after we wash hands, the hand blood is dipped. We then break the bread. This is why there is complete silence on these three performances in the Haggadah. 3 of them. So Joseph was sold to Egypt. Mashiach was sold to a form of Egypt in his day. In Sefer Zerubbabel, the Midrash, there is a vision described over there. Zerubbabel saw the vision of a despised and wounded man. And this despised and wounded man spoke to Zerubbabel in this vision. This is based upon a rabbinic midrash. And Zerubbabel said, his words comforted me. And I asked him, what's the name of this place that you are in? And he said, this is the greater Rome in which I am imprisoned until the end. I am locked up in Rome. This is why in the Talmud it says in the Tractate Sanhedrin that Mashiach is in Rome as a Mitzora, as a leper. So Sefer Zerubbabel says, when I heard this, what Mashiach was saying that he is in Rome as a prisoner, he says that I covered my face. And he said, I heard you are Mashiach of the God of Jacob. And instantly, when he recognized who this leper was, he recognized this leper was none other than the Mashiach. Sefer Zerubbabel say, instantly when I said that, when I acknowledged, when I said that you are Mashiach, you are the God of Israel, instantly I saw the beauty and the salvation glowing from him. What the Midrash is saying as greater Rome is a reference my brothers and sisters, to Christianity. All throughout rabbinical literature, Rome is called Edom, the name of Esau, which refers to Christians. The sages and the rabbis, they're not against Christians as per se. What they're trying to say, they're talking about Christianity as a system. They're not talking about any individual. They're not talking about any church. They're not talking about any bishop or pastor. They're talking about Christianity, quote unquote, as a religion, as a system. What the rabbis and the sages acknowledge is that Mashiach is going to be found in Rome, just like Moses was found in Egypt. His identity is going to be changed just like Joseph, but that is where salvation is going to come out of. Just like Joseph in Egypt was hidden, his identity was hidden, his clothing was Egyptian. There came a point after some time, his brothers, he revealed himself to his brothers from out of Egypt, from out of Christianity, from out of Rome. Mashiach is going to reveal himself to not only the Christian brothers and sisters, but to his Jewish brothers and sisters. The Christian brothers and sisters will recognize that Yeshua, the Messiah, is the Jewish Messiah, and my brothers in Israel will recognize that he truly is our brother. Just like Joseph told his brothers, Ani Yosef, Mashiach will say, I am Ani Mashiach. So to a rabbinic mind, Messiah is there because he was condemned as a criminal. Joseph is there because he was condemned as a criminal. But what the Jewish people didn't realize is that they were just acting out their part in God's divine plan of salvation. Because when you go back, the purpose of the bread of affliction is to recall the affliction of Egypt. But if we go back to Pasha Lek Lekah in Genesis chapter 12 to 17, especially to the passage in the covenant of paths in Genesis 15, God told Abraham in advance, your descendants are going to go down to the land. God does not fill him up on everything, on why they are going to go down there or how they are going to go down there. They are just going to end up there, is what he says. But when we read the story unfold throughout the Torah, through different Torah portions and pashiyot, you see God deliberately set everything up for the Jews so that the Jewish people could be the light, or lagoyim. Every aspect on the page, every part of the page, as you see in the scriptures from Genesis onwards, is the story of the Mashiach being written. That it is his nature that one day he would be sold into exile in order to be a source of salvation for the entire world and Israel. And the only way, friends, to come out, the only way to come out of Egypt, you know how? It is through the Mashiach. The only way to remove hate without a cause is through the Mashiach. That is why I keep telling from the very beginning, we need to realize how dangerous it is to have hate without a cause while we claim that we are believers in the Mashiach. How detrimental, how disastrous it is for the body of Mashiach to say, I have the Mashiach, but I have hate without a cause, not to anybody else, but to my own brothers and sisters. And out of that, we show hate without a cause to Messiah's brothers and sisters. This is why the Haggadah says, now we are slaves. Next year, may we be free men. Bene Kurim. I don't know about you. I'm not trying to be anyone's slave. Not a slave to the world. So friends, I mentioned earlier that a lot of people who sit in the Seder table like to sing or like to say, Lashana Habaha Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. They like to sing the song or do a little dance, but nobody is doing anything to bring Jerusalem. Nobody is doing anything to get to Jerusalem. What about us? What about you? What about me? We wait for Mashiach. We look for Mashiach. What are we doing to bring the coming of the Mashiach? That's the question that we have to ask. If we think that God is on autopilot, that he will decide when Mashiach comes, yes, he surely will decide when Messiah comes. That's true. But my brothers and sisters, our actions can actually promote a response from God. The question is, what are we doing? What are you doing to speed up the Geulah? What are you doing to speed up the redemption process? What are you doing to speed up the coming of the Mashiach? Do we just get up and sing some songs and do a dance? What is our day-to-day activity like in what we do? Let us remember the root of Pesach is all about remembering the sale of Joseph, which is a foreshadow of the Mashiach. Do you and I, on a day-to-day basis, do we transgress the goodness of God's mercy displayed in Messiah through our sins, where we can crucify him over and over again, as it says of Hebrews? We can't bring him up like a sin offering. We can just, we just use him as a get out of hell free card. Why? Because we have taken the grace of God very lightly. And if you have taken the grace of God very lightly, my brothers and sisters, I want you to know you are abusing the system which God has placed. Very clearly in the apostolic writings, it says, the grace of God gives me the ability to say no to sin. The grace of God is not so that I can continue in my sin. The grace of God is so that I would say no. No to sin, no to my evil ways, no to my wicked thoughts, no to my evil profane words, no to my evil actions, but to live a life of holiness, but to live a life of being set apart. How do I do that? I do it when I do what the scriptures tell me to do. So we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing to be a face of redemption? What are our actions and our words doing? Do we still speak like a slave, act like a slave, and think like a slave? Remember, Joseph was sold because of baseless hate. Whenever you go the opposite of what Messiah has called you to do, you are in a way, directly or indirectly, almost selling the into prison. You're basically saying that I want to be a person in bondage. Who wants to be in bondage? Not me. I don't believe anybody wants to be in bondage. The Haggadah acknowledges, and that's the crazy part. It's right there in the front page of the Haggadah. It acknowledges that until the inner chametz, the inner leaven of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is removed, is extracted, people are not free men. Israel will not experience redemption. So the question is, how do we experience freedom? As Yeshua says, he says over there in John chapter 8, verses 34 to 36. John chapter 8, 34 to 36. Yeshua says, I say to you, anyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever. Only the son does. So if the son makes you free, you are free indeed. You are free sons. Then understand in emet, understand in truth that you are free indeed. So friends, what I would like to ask here is, what are you doing that is preventing the coming of the Mashiach. Our sins, our bitternesses, our unforgivenesses, our hate without a cause to one another, causing a delay. We learn here the mystery of the Haggadah is that the urkats, the washing of the hands, the karpats, the yakats, the breaking of the middle matzah, all of that is a silent way of acknowledging the sale of Joseph, which was a shameful thing, a very shameful thing. In most Jewish communities today, those things are largely overlooked. People go through the Seder, it's like it's a ritual. And the sad part is, even in Messianic communities, it is. If we just go through it as a ritual, only to hurry up to sing a couple of good songs about next year in Jerusalem. But what are you doing in the meantime to speed up the process of redemption? How can they know if they don't have the truth? You who know the truth, what are you doing to bring the light of the truth to them? If you do not have the light within you, you have the light, but you are still in bondage, then the world is not getting any better. That's the problem even today. Friends, remember, Mashiach is about recognizing the lost secret of the Seder. Remembering Mashiach is about recognizing the lost secret of the Seder. When we do the Seder, Mashiach is there all over. All you need is spiritual cognition to open your spiritual eyes. There is another aspect of what the Mashiach is called. There is another word in Hebrew called Miskain. Miskain is another synonym for poor. And it is found in the book of Ecclesiastes chapter 9 verse 14 and 15. Where Solomon says in Ecclesiastes chapter 9 verse 14 and 15, Solomon wrote, there was a little city with few men in it, and a great king came against it, besieged it, built great snares around it. Verse 15 says, now there was found a Miskain, a poor wise man. He by his wisdom delivered the city, yet no one remembered that Miskain, that poor wise man. Just like no one remembers Joseph, whose wisdom saved the Jews. Just like a lot of people don't even know Mashiach, who saved the world. The poor wise man, the Miskain, who came as Oni, as afflicted and as poor. Friends, yours and my actions are what will remember Mashiach. We, you and I, are the faces of Messiah. We are the body of Messiah. Our actions demonstrate whether we want to see redemption in the world or whether we want to see more prolonged suffering in exile. So this Pesach, remember the root of Pesach. The root of Pesach is not about miracles. Praise God, that's nice. It's nothing for God to work a miracle. Or remember the bondage and harsh life. That's also nice. But friends, the underlying cause of Pesach is remembering the sale of Joseph. We remember the sale of Mashiach 2,000 years ago. So friends, we have reason to rejoice because that sale came to bring life. If very clearly he says, he that has him has life. If you have him, you have life eternal. The thief comes to steal, kill, and plunder, but the master said that I have come to give life. We have every reason to rejoice. Friends, if you have life, it's time to give up baseless hatred. It's time to show that life through love and harmony to one another, especially to the body of Messiah. But yet, Mashiach may be found as a prisoner in Jewish thought, in the Christian realm. But that is where salvation is going to come from for the Jewish people, and that is where it is going to come from. So you and I, my brothers and sisters, are emissaries. We are the Gufa Mashiach. We are the body of Messiah. We need to be the ones to speak about redemption. How do we do it? We do it by living a lifestyle that is worthy and not talking about it. It's not about the talk, it's about living it. Just like Peter says in 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 11 and 12, what does he say? What kind of people should you be? You should lead holy and godly lives as you wait for the day of God and work to hasten its coming. That means I'm not just living, I'm going to do something to hasten the coming of life. So in other words, Peter is saying, living our lives in holiness and godliness, and by doing so, we are looking forward and we are hastening, or we are speeding up the coming of Mashiach. So friends, I urge you all, this Pesach season, this Chag HaMatzot, really search for any residual comments, ego, bitterness, unforgiveness, pride, and leaven within you. Really search and ask the Mashiach to help extract it out of you so that you may be presented as an unleavened bread before the King. Amen. May you all have a wonderful holiday. May it be a holiday of growth. May it be a holiday of redemption from exile. May we come out of Egypt and our old mindset, and may this time be a holiday of memory, because in the memory lies the redemption. May the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov bless you and keep you. Chag Kasher Vasamayach, be well and be strong.